of week 11 of Zoom Chats, this great series that we're featuring great local and international designers, creatives, illustrators, etc., to inspire and show you a little bit about what everyone else is working on. So today we have local illustrator Ryan Stiner, who's you might know his work from Zingerman's. He's a great illustrator, painter, and designer. He's now working at ClickFunnels as a social media illustrator. He'll be talking with us today a little bit about what he's been up to and what he's doing and kind of his process and journey over 15 years of illustration and work. Got a couple housekeeping notes to begin with. We do these talks for free. We just want to make sure that we give back to the community as well. So if you like what we're doing here, consider tossing some support and donation to some of these great organizations who are working right now during kind of this momentous period of our civil rights movement. We first got the Detroit Justice Center, which is a nonprofit law firm dedicated to working alongside communities to create economic opportunities, transform the justice system, and promote equitable and just cities. We also work with the Bail Project, which, if you don't know, helps people out who are dealing with the problematic and often predatory world of bail system. There's also Michigan Liberation, which is a statewide network of people and organizations organizing to end the criminalization of Black families and communities of color in Michigan. They envision a state without mass incarceration or mass policing, another great local org. There's also DAEM, which is the Detroit Area Youth Uniting Michigan, which is a youth-led organization striving for accountability from leaders, justice for their communities, and a seat at the table for all marginalized youth. It's run by high schoolers, great organization. They helped put together the Earth Day March last year as well, if you remember that. Definitely give them some support. Love to see high schoolers doing great activism and trying to influence change as high schoolers. It's great. There is Detroit Will Breathe. If you've been paying attention to the protests that are going on in Detroit every day, Detroit Will Breathe is this collective people who have decided to show up every day on the streets to fight police brutality. They have a GoFundMe set up if you want to search and find that. Great organization doing a lot of work out there fighting the good fight. So give them a look up. There's also the Michigan Solidarity Bail Fund, which is a project to bail out those most in need who put themselves at risk fighting for our collective freedom. They're bailed alongside a lot of these protesters who've been arrested as part of these protests. And then finally, it's Pride Month. Give us some support to the Ruth Ellis Center, which is a local center helping LGBTQIA youth and young adults with an emphasis on young people of color experiencing homelessness or involved in the child welfare system or experiencing barriers to their health and well-being. Great organization. Love them to death. Actually, Don Kilpatrick, who we featured yesterday, did a bit of a printing demo on a print that he'll be selling off to support the Ruth Ellis Center. So look out on Don Kilpatrick's Instagram for a little more information on that. If you want to both get some good work from a great local artist as well as support a really powerful organization that's doing a lot of work. We also have two call outs here for the Posters on Politics and the World After, two poster exhibition series put together by Donna Jackson of DMJ Studio. She was on yesterday to talk a little bit about what those are doing. Posters on Politics has been going on for a couple years now, since 2017. If you have anything that is politically of note, given the current time period, it's a really great exhibition. Show off your work. It's showing internationally, digitally right now, but you got people from all over the world submitting for that. Great piece of work there. And then the World After, which is another poster exhibition thinking about what the world is going to look like during and after this COVID-19 pandemic. Both of these have a deadline of August 1st, so you got a month or so to whip something up and get it in. That's at dmjstudio.com. So we're going to start now. Ryan, you all ready?
I'm all set. Thanks.
Perfect. Everyone give a warm welcome to Ryan. If you're joining us on Facebook or Twitter or YouTube, feel free to comment there. I'll get questions into the chat. Or if you're joining us live on the Zoom call, make sure to also use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen if you have any questions or things for Ryan. Tell us a little bit about where you're coming from in the chat. Thank you again for joining us on your lunch break here. Ryan, why don't you take it away?
Awesome. Thanks, Dylan. Thanks, everybody, for coming. I'm really flattered, really grateful that people want to hear me talk and look at my face on their computer for a little while. Dylan had mentioned Don Kilpatrick. He was the guest yesterday, and I'm a big fan of his, so it's a real honor for me to be considered in any way in the same league as some of these other designers and illustrators and creatives around the country. I'm a professional illustrator. I've been illustrating for about 15 years, just shy. Most of my professional life was spent in the Zingerman's community of businesses in Ann Arbor. I've been drawing food and funny animals and cute little characters for a really long time. Recently, I transitioned to be a social media illustrator for a software as a service company called ClickFunnels. I do illustrations for the head of the company, Russell Brunson. They go on his Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn, all the social media sites. So I do a lot of motivational type illustrations now. Still kind of cute, but not quite as cute. A little silly, but not quite as silly. So there's been a nice transition for me. So I figured I would start out by going through a few slides I have to kind of show off not everything I've done, but a kind of progression. I'm an illustrator by trade. I like to build things, so I do a lot of 3D work. I do a lot of thing building. I'm also a painter in my own time. And yeah, I just generally like to create and make as much as I can. So I'll start out, I'll show some pictures of some of the work I've done and the progressions. And please, if you have any questions or if someone wants me to pause or something, just let me know. Let me share my screen and we'll get to it. So thanks again, and thanks to AIGA Detroit and to Dylan for helping make me feel comfortable at the start of this. Again, it's a real honor, and I'm really happy to answer any questions you guys might have. So here are some pictures. We're going to start out with this big old chunky loaf of bread. A lot of the work I did for Zingerman's was, the end of it was to sell food. So we had to work on illustration styles that would, make the food appealing in a I want to eat it kind of way, but also to kind of fit the character and the feel of the company. So, sometimes I did actual hand painted, and then sometimes, sometimes I worked digitally. I progressed towards more digital the longer I was working. I found it to be really forgiving and really fit my workflow to be able to create things digitally as much as possible. But like with these, there were definitely some more analog creations happening. So these are just different foods. They would be sold through a mail order catalog. These images were created by myself and other artists. I wasn't the only one. There's been a long history of illustrators working at Zingerman's. And then they would be sent to a pre-press company and scanned and formatted for a catalog. Usually, these are some scratchboard illustrations I've done. So again, back to the more analog style of actually working on the material. It was a lot of fun, scratchboards, but it's meticulous. It's not so good, not so easy on the hands or the carpal tunnel. But it's a really fun, dramatic, and unique way to illustrate some scenes. And then I'm not going to pause on every slide, but just a ton of different kinds of things I did for Zingerman's, all under that kind of same banner, that same look and feel. This was a kids activity sheet. More food. I started working it a little bit more digitally. At this time, I was using, I believe, like a Wacom slate, just a small tablet with a pen. Um, and yeah, so as many different things as I could draw. I tried to do some collage things, tried to think out of the box. The company that I worked for, Zingerman's, was really good about allowing me a lot of time to figure out new ways to express things or new creative ways to explore the message or to make it exciting for people to look at. So, again, this is a poster for an event, some catalog covers. It was just a lot of varied stuff, and it was a lot of fun. This was a shirt that I had made for the coffee company. Yeah, a goofy monkey in the middle sticking his tongue out. I mean, why not? I was given a lot of freedom, and I definitely explored as much as possible. And then there were a lot of things like this. This didn't end up getting used, but I just had the opportunity to explore a slightly different look and feel for Zingerman's Roadhouse, which is a sit-down restaurant in Ann Arbor. Oh, I lost there we go. And then, more fun, silly stuff. So some Halloween promotion, there's a candy company. This is when I started to definitely creep more digitally. I found I had a lot more freedom using different textures and brushes and different workflows in order to make it really pop. I think there's a nice energy that you can capture either with digital work or with analog work. I just prefer the digital stuff. Again, more Zingerman's illustrations. This is Spice Girls illustration, which I had probably a lot more fun doing than I should have had. But it was, again, just try to be goofy and irreverent and have fun with it. More Zingerman's illustrations. And again, this, if you go from one to the next, these are both done for the same company, but there's a broad view of style and how to employ it and the aesthetic. And so it was nice for me, as a growing professional artist, to have the opportunity to explore so many different varied styles. And I think it's really important to have cast as wide of a net as you can when you're doing illustrations or art or design, and not get so stuck on trying to produce one thing in kind of a signature style every time. I have a lot of thoughts about style, but I won't go too far into it. I just think it's important to experiment as much as you can, and that you'll eventually kind of stumble into kind of a repeatable style. So more Zingerman stuff, again, digitally. Again, irreverent, trying not to take itself too seriously. These are some illustrations I created for Miss Kim, which is a Korean restaurant in Ann Arbor, part of the Zingerman's family. These were a lot of fun. This was a real stark contrast to the work I had been doing up until that time. The managing partner wanted stuff that was kind of odd and eccentric, a little weird, sometimes uncomfortable, just something that kind of set itself apart even more from the Zingerman's look and feel, which also, I believe, sets itself apart from the standard kind of food business look and feel. And she wanted to be inclusive. She wanted to show a wide array of people at the restaurant. This is more work I've done, again, just kind of fun and silly. We decided to do some work based on old comic book covers. There were a few in this series. I think this is the only slide I have teed up. Just fun, exciting, kind of bold stuff. I started working more with shapes and values and less with outlines, and I experimented with that for quite a while. And this was a catalog cover. Some packaging work. So this is an illustration that went around a custom tin of cookies, Christmas cookies called Lebkuchen. It doesn't have much to do with food. Zingerman's, again, was really, really flexible in allowing me to kind of play with the ideas quite a bit. This is for a local food event, a charitable event for food gatherers called Grillin', and we decided to go with food superheroes. So again, I had a lot of fun drawing that. Some honey illustrations. My personal style tends to be a lot more minimal than what I was doing for Zingerman's at the time. And this was something that I kind of brought that minimalism into designing some of the identity for a series of workshops for Zing Train. Again, just more illustrations. It's all very silly. This is, I wanted to draw I wanted to illustrate what a vintage gift box would look like. So I just thought of this dandy chap with some, high heels and a cane, and you can kind of hear him clicking as he walks. So again, just trying to have a lot of fun with it. The professional illustration for me, unless you're working with some really heavy, like meaty concepts, it's important to have fun with it. It's important for me to be able to look at my drawings and have fun during the process, and to look back on them now and have fun looking at them. Again, it's pretty lighthearted, the stuff that I get to deal with, so it's easy for me to say that. I'm sure a lot of people are working on much more serious weighted issues than this gentleman who's attending the fancy food show and exploring different foods. These were so the Roadhouse started rebranding a little bit, the restaurant in Ann Arbor. So they wanted something that was a little bit different, again, from the typical look and feel. So I've created this series of posters that will be hanging in the restaurant to kind of help guide that a little bit. Again, I say this a lot, it was a lot of fun to work on these. A lot of freedom and a lot of just openness to do whatever struck me. This was a very involved illustration. What is Zingerman's anyway? So these are all the different businesses in the community of businesses. I don't think I've ever drawn this many people or entities in one picture before, so it was a real effort on my part. But again, it's really fun. I like to look at it. It's important to me to try to show diversity in the work. I draw a lot of people. And not only is it important, I think, to give everyone representation so that everyone can identify with whatever it is you're putting out there. It's also really boring to draw the same person over and over and over again. So this was a real challenge, coming up with however many people there are on the screen right now. But it's important. It's important, I think, for people to look up and see, even in marketing, where maybe capitalism isn't the most high-minded part of it, but when people are consuming that information, I think it's important for them to be able to look at it and identify with it, and to see someone like them. So I try to do that as much as I can, to just include just everybody. So again, definitely straying into very digital. That's a pretty low res picture, I apologize. Very digital, kind of fun drawings. These are for some soups at Zingerman's Bakehouse. And that kind of crept in. I've done a lot of freelance in my life, a lot of contract work. This was an editorial cartoon. Someone was talking. I get a lot of traffic and a lot of attention for my work at Zingerman. So a lot of people will come and ask me to do work similar to that. And this is kind of finding that middle ground a little bit between my style or what I see as my style now and my work for Zingerman's. But this was just something where she wanted to express that people are getting lost in all these numbers about climate change. So she wanted someone kind of lost in a sea of numbers. And this is more my personal illustration. So we'll go through a few of these. I like things that are at least currently, I like things that are very high contrast, that are very sharp, that have a lot of abstraction to them, but then kind of, not so much that you can't tell what you're looking at. But that might take you a second to kind of see the depth there or something like that. So this is in somewhat of a chronological order. And yeah, I don't have much time right now to do much personal illustration, but when I do, it all seems to kind of fall under this high contrast kind of stuff. Some of this is work that was commissioned. This was for a band in Michigan. They wanted an album cover. Some of these were poster submissions. So early on in my career, I was still trying to just kind of get my stuff out as much as possible. So poster contests, things like that, where you're essentially kind of working for free, I think are a great way to explore ideas. I think it's a bit, if you're in it for the reward or in it to win, then you might be in it for the wrong reasons, in my opinion. I just use them as a good way to explore different styles and different ways to approach things. And yeah, I like seeing leaping people. So I have a theme in some of my drawings of people jumping into different situations. Again, I like the high contrast. I like the sharpness. I like the hidden. I like to see scale. Scale is very important to me in my personal work. So you'll see the little characters in this image are very small, and it really casts this view of their world as being immense. And I definitely appreciate that. I've done some logo design work, both through my employment at Zingerman's and on my own. It's a lot of fun for me to help create a large part of a business's identity. I take a lot of pride in that, and I take it really seriously. This was for Miss Kim. It's a lot of fun for me to connect with another person and really kind of suss out the details, or maybe not the details, even the abstracts of what they're looking for, and try to deliver something that really connects with them. And when you're dealing with a business owner, you're really trying to connect with like an individual person. So I find those moments really powerful. And so now we're into some paintings. This painting is probably 20 years old at this point. And I did a whole series of bears and cats. It's a lot, I love painting. It's probably the most time consuming thing and has the least immediate impactful reward for me. But I love the process. These are all very old paintings. I love when I'm done with the painting of sitting down and just kind of looking at it. But you can see, my style has definitely evolved. If you would have told me 20 years ago that I would be living in rural, that's better resolution, that I'd be living in rural Michigan painting landscapes and sunsets, I probably would have laughed at you and walked away. But that's what I do now. I love to paint these kind of lush sunsets and sunrises. I from my youth, I was always fascinated with clouds. So it's a big thing for me now. I got swept up in pour painting, so I really experimented with a lot of textures, and this is probably 3 or 4 years old at this point. So I got really enamored with the way that the paint just naturally kind of flowed together. And I tried to play around with that for a little while. And this is what I'm currently doing, this style of kind of almost screen printy, kind of like blocks of color, sunsets and sunrises and things. It's what I'm really drawn to now. I really enjoy the process. I find it kind of meditative, whereas illustration isn't so calming for me. And I make things. So a lot of this happened because when I was working at Zingerman's, they needed something made, and I was willing to try it out. This is a food ninja. These are some fake cheeses that a restaurant wanted to display rather than going through actual product. So I sculpted these and molded them and then cast them in plaster and painted them. I made a lot of 3D signage. If you're ever in the community of businesses in Ann Arbor, if you're walking around, you'll probably see some of my work. These are some signs at Zingerman's Deli. This is the sign I made for the front of the next door cafe. And again, all this stuff, I had no idea what I was doing. They wanted a sign, so I learned how to make signs. They wanted more complicated signs, so I learned how to make more complicated signs. It's been a really fun process for me to just kind of pick up new tasks or new skills and try to make them work for people. I was never taught or trained as a sign maker. I just kind of ended up doing it, and I'm really happy that I have. This is another large 3D illustration or installation. So each one of those shapes all this stuff is done on a CNC router, a shopbot, and they're all individually carved by machine and then painted and reassembled. Pretty involved stuff, but a lot of fun. And these are some early signs and some business signs that I made for the community of businesses. I don't think it's anything groundbreaking, but it's a lot of fun. And since I was never trained how to do it, I feel very that they're a pretty sincere reflection of my tastes and my decisions. So it's been a lot of fun. So now we're moving into some of the illustrations, and I'll close it out with some of these slides. These are illustrations that I'm doing currently for ClickFunnels. Again, I'm doing social media illustrations. It's a software as a service company. The young person in front is a child version of Russell Brunson, who is the head of the company. And these just go kind of put out his message into the world. Not all of these have been published or seen live time yet, but some of them have, and they've done pretty good. I'm pretty excited about the response that I'm getting. But it's motivational, and it's different than what I've done before. I think as a professional, it's incumbent on you to kind of find what the other people want out of your illustrations, and then just try to kind of flavor it with your own decisions and style, and to not get too caught up in trying to make everything scream your particular style. Again, it's important. I like the work that I'm doing, but these people are also paying me, so I want to make sure that they're happy with what I'm giving them, that I'm not the only one that's happy with the work. So yeah, I think there's probably a few more slides. Again, just for different social media, I think these were on Facebook. Most of them are Instagram posts. I think that's the last slide. So yeah, I think that's everything I've got to show right now. I'm happy to keep talking about myself, but if anyone has any questions, it's nice. I see some familiar faces or names in the attendees list. So thank you to friends and strangers for joining. Go ahead.
You got a bunch of people in chat calling out also a couple current Zingerman's employees.
For sure.
Loving your work as well. So if anyone here in attendees and on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, if you have questions, use your comment field or toss in the Q&A at the bottom, and we'll get to them here in the talk. Great. Do you want to, while we're waiting on people to type some questions, do you want to talk a little bit about what it's like working on the Zingerman's creative team? I know there's like a pretty big team, and like you definitely have a big presence in there, but like what's the collaborative like design experience like there?
Sure. Well, the team there, and I'm presuming it hasn't changed much since I left. The team there is not as big as you might expect for the amount of work that they do. When I left, it was myself, and we employed some other freelance illustrators. There was a director, a design manager, 2 designers, a small web team of 3 people. It's really a really tight-knit team, and it's probably changed a little bit since I was there, but it's very fast-paced. There was a lot of work to be done, working for essentially 12 different businesses, all coming at you with different requests. It could be pretty hectic, but it was very collaborative. We had an open office space, and there was a lot of communication and conversation and real effort to kind of work together. A lot of us wore multiple hats, so it was really, really nice. So that was internally. And then externally, you have to deal with all these different businesses and personalities. And as you work with different people, you find more success with some than with others. And some, with any collaboration, some that you don't feel are going to be successful, you start out just gritting your teeth, end up with some of the best work that you feel you've done. At least that was the case with me. So yeah, on one day I would talk with, the managing partner at the deli about how to create an illustration for the menu. And the next day I'd be working with, the web team, who I see, little initials are watching me talk about them right now. I would work with them about, what small icon, what I could create to fit in this one spot on a website. So it was really varied. It was a lot of work, but like I've said all along, it was a lot of fun. It was really productive and really nice to work with so many other people so many, I already said it's probably like 12 people, to work with so many people that were so committed to doing, not only doing things the right way, but making really great work. So that process was something that I don't think that I'll have that again, of being in that kind of space with that many people around me, in an open kind of communication. It was really unique. And it was a positive experience, looking back on that 13 years of my life, for sure.
Hi, Ryan. This is Chioki, one of the AIGA board members. A question I have for you: what was your favorite thing to eat at Zingerman's, since you got to see everything?
Sure, sure. Yeah, it's hi Chioki. It's nice to meet you. A lot of the things, when you work at a food business, you don't always eat the same things that the people that go in and wait in line eat. You come up with a lot of fun customizations. And I mean, I I love food. I love to eat a lot of food. But my favorite thing that sticks out in my head is the bakehouse makes these shorthand is churb. They're cheddar herb scones. They're these little scones covered with savory herbs and cheddar cheese, and they're ridiculous. And they used to make biscuits and gravy at the deli. So I would get biscuits and gravy, but instead of the biscuits, I would get these cheddar herb scones and just cover them with sausage gravy. So that was probably my favorite thing.
Nice. I want to ask this question from Laura from Facebook. She says, people love Zingerman's for their food and for their love to the community and their employees. Knowing that there was the pressure of having to care for a brand that is held high, like how did you deal with that pressure, knowing that you were working on something that people truly cared about because how they cared about the community and their employees?
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting because, like I said, there was a big history of other artists that worked there before me. And, I have a good friend, Ian Nagy, who is probably most singularly responsible for the illustrative look and feel. He was there long before I was there, and there with me for some time as well. And so I came into something that was pretty well established. So all I kind of had to do at the beginning was figure out how I could kind of join that flow. And then, at Zingerman's, you're surrounded by a lot of principled people, a lot of people that hold certain things in regard that you might not find at other businesses. So you're surrounded with a lot of talk and discussion about that stuff. So you kind of, if you're that kind of minded person, you kind of join the flow. But thankfully, there was a big history of people before me, and I was surrounded by people when I worked there that all just cared so much about not only making the business successful, but making each other successful. So I want to say, condensing that 13 years into one answer, it wasn't that hard. But in the immediate moments, certainly it was challenging, and there were a lot of discussions about, sometimes it was about the minutia of a drawing, the small bits that you would just kind of throw away or you wouldn't pay attention to, and then you'd have some other people come in and kind of see it for the first time and point things out to you. So it was an effort to kind of craft a lot of those small decisions to make it fit in with the brand and to make people love it. And then again, because I had such a history, what I had to find myself to be successful in was to kind of just keep it kind of light and fun and energetic. So if I kind of met those things and I had the people, the supporting cast and the history that helped reinforce a lot of the ideals that people care about so much about Zingerman's, it made it, relatively easy.
Okay. And this question is from Josh Richards. He says, "Great to see you." He's curious, what is it like going from in-person teams to working remotely and maybe working on your own for a single company?
Yeah, for sure. That's a great question. It was a bit of a culture shock to be honest at the beginning. I work with a great team of people at ClickFunnels. I work entirely remotely. They're all based in Idaho, and it's a tricky thing for sure. And the difficult thing in kind of building it as an analogy or an analog is that the work I do is so much different right now. The illustrations I do, I'm allowed to be a little bit more singular in how I have to think about them and craft them and the time that I spent working on them. Excuse me. Whereas before I was working with a designer to create something for a box, and that had to be that printed a certain day. Now I'm working with a concept. I have a lead contact at ClickFunnels. I have a team, I think, of 4 other people and I have one person that I communicate with the most, and everyone else I kind of more communicate with socially and just kind of keep in touch with what the company's doing. So there was a culture shock there of working with so many people with very tight and solid deadlines to working with just one person and a few people remotely. But for me, I'm a people person. I like to talk to people. I like to see people, which is the real challenge. But we still communicate. That it's the effort has to come from me to, now that I know that I'm working remote, and to know that I need certain things, to just be very open with communication. I find working remote can be very freeing, but it's also really challenging. It's challenging to stay on task. It's challenging to not be distracted by personal projects. It's challenging to, there's a lot of subtext that you miss when you're talking to people over Zoom or messaging apps or Slack or whatever. So, it's just a different style of communication. So it's tricky. I'm almost 6 months into my new position, and it's getting easier. And the people I work with, they make it easy. It's a really nice professional group of people. But it was tricky. It definitely changes the way that I work as part of a team, but it doesn't really change my workflow as far as creation goes.
Thank you for that answer. Two other questions, but I'm going to make them into one question. So one is, what is your process like for coming up with a new illustration, and how much time do you typically goes into that illustration?
Sure. That's a good question. It's shifting a little bit from the work that I used to do. Again, most of my professional life has been under one company. So, I'm still kind of learning how processes change. I work on an iPad. A long time ago, I worked on paper with a pen and a scanner. As soon as I could step away from a paper and pen with a scanner, I did. I started working digitally, and I went from using a slate tablet to a Wacom screen. And about 3 or 4 years ago, I moved on to using an iPad with a Procreate app. And it's amazing. It's kind of second to none as far as my process goes. And so, the process kind of starts out. I'm trying to think if this is universal, if it was the same way at Zingerman's as it is at ClickFunnels. I'm given a concept. I like to produce, at least at Zingerman's, I like to produce a couple sketches to kind of see. Well, that's not necessarily true. In the beginning, when I was still kind of new or not 13 years seasoned, I would like to produce a couple or a few sketches for each concept and kind of bounce them off other people and see what stuck. At Zingerman's, as I worked there, in the later years, I was much more confident in what I was supposed to be doing and being able to read what the clients wanted. So there was a little bit less of that, like exhibiting sketches and getting feedback. But anyways, I create sketches, and then it's a process of like, speaking technically, it's a process of creating a lot of layers, a lot of like onion skins, where you have a semi-transparent layer and you just kind of rework it on top, and then I keep doing that until it gets to a point that I like it. It's interesting, and I don't know if anybody else will find this interesting. Usually, instead of drawing a fine line that I like to draw a really big line and then chip away at it. So I'll draw like a wide line. You could think like the analog would be like you drawing a wide line with a marker and then covering up pieces of it with a whiteout or erasing it. I like to kind of chip away to get kind of like a sculpture, to kind of get the line that I want in the end. And that's pretty much the same now. Right now with ClickFunnels, they have a list of assets that they want created, with some motivational quotes or some idea of the composition. And then it's up to me to kind of take that and run with it. I produce things at a faster clip now, and the world of social media is a lot different than the world of print. So the process of making an image that is going on a box that's being printed 10,000 times is much different than the process that goes into an image that is going to be seen, by 20,000 people on Instagram and then be gone. Now, there's real time temporal difference between how the two are used. So there's a lot more, you know, minor nitpicking aspects to something when a business is investing in printing 10,000 boxes with your artwork on it than there is for an illustration that's just kind of going to be seen and go away. So some of the processes are different, some are the same. The actual art creation using the iPad and the way that I create the line and the way that I color hasn't really changed for a long time.
Okay. Let's see, another question from Facebook. It says, working remotely, do you have a similar personal routine as when you were working with people face to face, such as getting dressed, eating breakfast, etc.? Like, how is that similar, or how has it changed?
Sure. Yeah, I can talk for ages about how I get dressed in the morning. But for me, it didn't at first, and then the pandemic hit, and now everything's a little bit different again. It was interesting. I transitioned to this job about 2 months before Michigan had its stay-at-home orders. So I had, when I first started, I had the same, and much of it has stuck, but I had the same idea of get up at a certain time, get showered, get dressed like you're going to leave the house, and then get to work. I don't find that the routine is too much different. I really worked hard. I read a lot and talked to a lot of people who transitioned to remote work, and I knew that maintaining that level of routine was very important. I'm a very routine oriented person, so it was easy for me and important to kind of keep those same things. It shifted a little bit with the pandemic. I have two young kids. They're upstairs right now. I have two young kids and a wife who I'm now around a lot more. And then with the shutdown, they were home from school and et cetera, et cetera. So there were some smaller shifts that had happened because of that. But it's still very important for me to dedicate a chunk of time to make sure that I'm ready at a certain time in the day. I find my creativity is at its peak like late morning, early afternoon, and the longer the day drags on, the less creative I feel. So if I didn't get started right away, I wouldn't be productive, or rather, the work that I did, I wouldn't be as pleased with because it would feel more rote or more boilerplatey. So I don't know if I'm answering the question. The routine was important. It didn't shift too much. Most of my communication just happened online rather than in person. I still have my cup of tea or 10 in the morning. I still try to communicate with some people, have some laughs, and then I go online. I try to spend a little bit of time each day looking at art that I like, whether it's stuff that's directly related to the business or freelance or whatever that I'm working on, or just stuff that I like to look at. It's important for me to kind of keep a refreshed visual language in front of my eyes, and that's sometimes trickier without other people who are sharing things with you, but you just have to make a bit of an effort. But overall, I know I'm not alone as an artist when I say I don't mind time to myself. I don't mind being introverted and not talking, so it's been relatively easy to switch over.
Okay. And I would say, like, with your team being back in Idaho, how does that work? Like, with it being a 2-hour time difference.
Yeah, it's a little tricky, and again, the team that I work with, they really do a good job of facilitating conversations when they need to happen. The real thing is that I'm working, at least with ClickFunnels, I'm working so far ahead that there's very little that I need to do by a certain time every day. So I have a log of work that I'm supposed to complete every week or so. And there's no real hard and fast deadline, again, because things aren't hitting 6 different desks on the way to a printer that's in a different state or in a different country. There's less emphasis on meeting certain things at a certain time every day. So the communication happens kind of throughout the day. And actually recently everyone on my team just shifted to work a slightly earlier shift. So most of the time that I'm working, they're working too. That wasn't always the case. But again, it doesn't, most of my creativity is happening in the morning. So if they weren't around, I was just busy drawing.
We have a question from Anastasia. She asks for suggestions on looking to get into digital illustration.
Sure. Yeah. I, it's, I've been very fortunate. 99% of the technology I've used in my life has been supplied by my employer. So it's easy for me to say, just get an iPad and an Apple Pencil and sit down for a few weeks and play around. But that's kind of what it is. For me, the iPad is just the most accessible piece of tech to do this work. And as a professional, I find it just does everything I want to do really, really well. But it's not a small investment. So when I first started doing digitally, I just had one of those small table mounted slates that didn't have a screen on it. It was a Wacom. It just had the pen. It was rather small. And I just kind of learned, it's a different process to speak technically about that. When you're not drawing on the thing that you see. So like when you're not drawing on a screen, like on an iPad or a Wacom screen, there's a real disconnect between your brain and your hand. And I find that was really tricky in the beginning, but looking back on it, it was really beneficial to train my brain and my hand to kind of work somewhat independently. And what I mean to say is you're looking at your screen to see what you're drawing, but what you're drawing is down on this slate that doesn't display what you're drawing. So you really have to be able to kind of move your hand and your fingers in the right way to create the image up on the screen that you want to see. And that kind of training was really, really beneficial to me. One of my favorite projects in art school was something called blind contour drawings, where you would look at the person and not look at the paper and try to just draw a portrait and never looking down at the paper. And I found that amazingly helpful and fun and beneficial for me in school. And using that early, $100 tablet slate was a nice way to kind of revisit that. And then, as you get more comfortable or as you convince other people to buy you things, just move into more advanced tech. Again, the iPad is much more affordable than a Wacom screen. So, I think I've said iPad about 100 times. I would highly recommend that when you can make that purchase.
Question, you kind of answered this next question. They're
Okay.
asking, what would you recommend for someone trying to get better at illustration?
Sure.
And I'm sure that's like a loaded question.
Yeah, it's interesting because again, like, I've just been doing this for so long. I've been really fortunate to be employed for almost 15 years as an illustrator. And even saying that now, it's just kind of like, holy crap, it's pretty ridiculous. So right now I have the ability to spend, my 8 or 9 hours every day working on illustration, and that repetition just kind of, sometimes it can be a bit of a drag, but if you try to just have the mentality that I want to make today's drawing better than yesterday's drawing in whatever way that you define better that day, that's just key for me. I get to do it 40 hours a week. I'm working on illustrations, so it's easy for me to just kind of get that repetition in, but it's really repetition. If I look back at the old drawings I did 10 years ago, I barely want to look at them anymore, because like I find that I've improved so much, and that's only come because I've done it for so long. The first loaf of bread I painted wasn't that great. The 400th loaf of bread I painted was a much different picture. So it's just repetition. It's just finding time. I get paid to do it, so I have to do it. And even if I feel dragged down, I don't want to draw, I still have to do it. And I find that it's important to get a balance there if you're not paid to do it, to not get dragged down too much. If you're not feeling it, don't do it. Don't make the art you want to create a chore, and make it something that makes you happy. And I do art in my own time still that makes me happy. My professional art most of the time makes me fairly happy. But since I'm paid, that doesn't matter so much. So if you don't have that crutch or that burden, it's not a burden to be paid. So let me rephrase that. If you don't have that crutch of being paid and forcing you to do it all the time, then don't beat yourself up over it. But repetition is key to get better for sure.
Okay, that's it. So like when you were working at Zingerman's, what were some what were some other like food businesses or restaurants that you thought were really good at, from a creative standpoint, that stood out, that you put a pin on them up on the walls, like they're not directly our competition, but we like the way that they're thinking?
Oh boy, that's a good question, and I honestly don't know that I have an answer for that. I tried. The Zingerman's look and feel was pretty unique in like contemporary business, I think, but even more so in the food business. There were plenty of other businesses that maybe weren't food related that I kind of put a pin in. Some small ones, or I consider small, like American Science and Surplus has this really great illustrated catalog. Um, I even things that maybe as a company I don't agree with the branding, but I like the illustrative work. I think Duluth Trading Company has a lot of fun stuff. But with Zingerman's, it was so, in a way, we were and when I was there, at least, we were kind of insulated because the work we did was so singular, that, and not in a bad way, but that it stood out in a really strong way versus other food businesses. That I didn't really take note of too many others that were doing it. It was just important to kind of keep doing what we were doing. And then as far as influencing my style, it's really just a carousel of Instagram swipes. I do so much consuming of art on Instagram. So it was just whatever, caught my fancy to kind of pursue. Again, I was given a lot of creative leeway with my work at Zingerman, so I could find something one day that I liked and try it out the next day on an illustration for a catalog or something. So not too many peers that I recognize, and not that they didn't exist, but I just didn't recognize them at my time.
Okay. Do you ever sell any of the art that you create in your own time?
I do. I've always joked in it. I'm highly motivated by money. I get to do creative stuff for a living, and I like to leverage that to give myself a lifestyle that I like. So I do a lot of freelance illustration and design. The paintings, I've sold some paintings for sure. I've had a few shows. The paintings for me are my painting work is much more personal, so it's a little bit harder for me to step away from the feelings I have. They're like my children. It's a little bit more difficult for me to sell those, although I will, and I have. And then it's, I find that most of the freelance illustration I do is for business clients. I don't often do anymore, at least a lot of like portrait work and things like that. In my heyday at Zingerman's, a lot of people again would know that look and feel and kind of approach me to do a wedding portrait in that style or something like that. So it's definitely happened, but I have a website, RyanSteinerArtThings.com. I don't list things for sale. I think I mentioned that I like to sell things. But if anybody wanted to check out what I do, and if there's interest, contact me.
Well, I think that's all the questions we got. If anyone else has anything to add here, we'll keep open for just a couple more minutes. I have a question for you, just kind of about like general process of learning to do new things. You've done a lot of expansion of your skill set into like sculpting and 3D signs and stuff like that. What are some like neat new methods and stuff that you find yourself like wanting to use and try? Anything that's piquing your fancy now?
Sure. Well, right now, again, I mean, speaking literally in the moment, everything is to a degree or another shut down. So I don't have a lot of exposure to new tools or new workspaces that are really like catching my fancy. what really was a big moment for me was when there was a maker space that opened up close to where I used to work, called MakerWorks. You might have seen the slide for their logo in my presentation. And that's just a typical maker space that has a lot of technology driven tools that I really like. Laser printers, shop bots, plasma cutters, all that kind of stuff. When you take these processes, which before were very weighty and very heavy, and you had to be a real skilled tradesperson to do those things, to take those and put those in the hands of a layperson like myself, to be able to use a laser cutter or a CNC router, really just kind of like expands everything, like so immediately. Like this whole new world of stuff comes into play. When I think about doing new things or expanding my horizons or my abilities, it's almost 100% of the time into a physical, tangible world. And it's not often am I like super motivated to try a brand new thing that is more two-dimensional or illustrative in nature. But if you teach me how to use a new tool that can, build this installation where I can do this LED wiring or sculptural elements and new ways to do that kind of stuff to make it more accessible to me, that might be the key, is that accessibility, that thing that I couldn't do before, but now I can. Those are the kinds of tools that really kind of make me pause thinking about everything that I'm working on and just open up a whole new world of stuff to do.
I definitely feel that. Again, I think I probably said this at least 10 times on these Zoom chats. Like, I love tools. I love a new tool. It's always an exciting new possibility to open it up. Well,
sure.
We're at about the hour mark here. I want to be respectful of your time here. So thank you so much, Ryan. I really appreciate you coming on and talking with us today about your work. It's always great to showcase some like awesome local talent too. So
for sure, thanks. I'm a little gobsmacked. I'm really honored that you guys considered talking to me, and that hopefully somebody found the time valuable.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Well, and hopefully we can all meet in person soon, grab some Zingerman's coffee, all that sort of stuff. So
sounds good.
Yeah, got a lot of comments coming in. Thanks, Ryan. Nice to see you. Dude, you rock. A lot of people giving you some love here.
I paid them all very not handsomely, but I paid them all to say that. So we're good.
Listen, even if it's paid, I personally appreciate it.
Awesome.
Okay, well,
thanks,
have
Dylan.
a great weekend, everyone who's joining us. We've got 2 more Zoom chats coming up next week, and then we're going to be taking a break for a little bit to give the programming team some time off. We've got 2 times Elliot and Ellen Rutt next week. 2 great people. Give them a follow and wait for those Zoom chats to come through. So we'll see you all next week.